We're back.
Hello, everyone,
Yes,
and
we are.
welcome back to I'm Not the Book Expert, but
What a
she
time to
is.
be
I
alive.
am your first
Percy has
host,
his weird
Rachel.
dream about Luke,
And I am
and
Maggie, your other
we
host,
think
and the
stuff's going
quote-unquote
down.
expert for this episode.
He tells Grover about
Not
it the
quote
next morning,
unquote.
and
You
we find out
are,
that
in
Zoe
fact,
also
the
had a weird
expert.
dream the night before.
I
so
am
bad
an
that
expert. I would not say I am
she summoned
the
Chiron.
expert.
Where do you make these
I
face
will
for?
accept that as an
I'm
alternative.
just
Okay,
trying to focus.
glad we're on the same page.
Okay.
Indeed.
And in this episode, we are
She summoned
continuing our
Chiron,
discussion on
and
Percy Jackson and the
we
Olympians
learned that he
by
sleeps with
talking
curlers
about
in his
the
tail.
third book in that series.
That is a very important
The
detail.
Titan's Curse.
It really is. It adds to his character, Maggie.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, she thinks Artemis, the goddess, is in trouble, and bad things are happening. At the end of this scene, Grover's like, hey, remember how you said it was like weird that the hunters just like happened to show up and save the day? And Percy's like, yeah. Grover's like, well, they might have been scouting us. Percy's like, huh? As it turns out, Grover found a brochure for the Hunters of Artemis in Annabeth's backpack. And Percy says, I don't understand. Grover replies, well, it seems to me maybe Annabeth was thinking about joining. The next scene begins. I'd like to say I took the news well. Reader, he did not.
No, he did not. Our poor boy, he's trying. He's trying real hard.
Yeah, he almost killed an Ares camper.
I have no comment.
I mean, yeah. Yeah, he did not. And everyone else at camp just seems to be very on edge. Selena, remember her, she's the head counselor of the Aphrodite cabin. She's getting into an argument with some hunters at the stables.
And Selena's ready to throw hands.
Yeah, Selena is ready to fight. And you know what? Good for her.
And also, up until this point, we haven't really had any Aphrodite kids who have exhibited any sort of fighting desire.
Yeah, we haven't seen very many Aphrodite campers, like, period.
Yeah.
But the ones that we have, like, the people who have been referenced to have been mostly like, oh, they just sit around and do their makeup and like gossip and like typical, like, I shouldn't say typical, I should say stereotypical, like, teenage movie teen girls.
Yeah.
Even though there are male Aphrodite campers, we're just gonna throw that out there.
Yes.
Anywho, camp is on edge. And what makes being on edge better than a friendly game of capture the flag?
Friendly in air quotes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tradition every time the hunters come to visit Camp Half-Blood that there is a game of capture the flag between the hunters and the campers.
Mm-hmm. Well, and all of the hunters are kind of excited. They're not upset about it, but nobody at camp is excited for it. Like, not even Chiron is excited for it.
Mm-hmm.
Dionysus might be excited for it, but Dionysus is also a butthole, and he's excited to watch the campers fail.
Yeah. The hunters have won every time. They have never been defeated. Percy and Talia have kind of a disagreement about who's supposed to be in charge because they both see themselves as leaders of the camp.
But they both say the other person should lead.
Yeah. Do they mean that, though?
Oh, I don't think they mean it at all, but do they say it? Yes.
Yes, they do say it. Talia does take the lead in one aspect of it, and we see more about Selena, actually. Selena participates in... I'm just really focused on her in this chapter, I'm sorry. But Selena participates in Capture the Flag. She's putting on her armor, and she says, I'll pulverize them, meaning the hunters. Again, good for her. And as they're getting ready to start the game, Talia says, we'll send a decoy to the left. Selena, you lead that. So Talia, one of, like, the best fighters at camp, also trusts Selena's ability in a fight.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really appreciate that dynamic, and, like, that we're getting to see more of the other campers at camp. Like, in the Sea of Monsters, we got to see more of Beckendorf, right? And how he interacts with Tyson and Percy. And in this book, we get to see a little bit more of Selena and how she interacts with the rest of the camp as well. So
They're two of my favorite side demigods.
I really love them.
They bring me a lot of feelings.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, Rachel, would you like to guess who wins the game of Capture the Flag?
The hunters. That's
Of course. And
duh.
in no small part because Percy decides to take matters into his own hands, and it's not entirely his fault, but things
It
get
kind of
messy.
it is mostly Percy's fault because he didn't want to feel second place to Talia.
Yes. Yeah. And there's that pride coming into play again, right? Like, we've never seen Percy be prideful or jealous before.
Mm-hmm.
And this is coming. Talia is who brings that out of him. And for better or for worse, mostly for worse, let's be real.
It kills me. I think it's hilarious. I see it all the time in the classroom. So the fact that it exists in this just brings me this unreasonable amount of joy. And I just have feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it culminates in a fight between them, right? Like
A
at the creek.
bad fight.
Yeah.
Like Zeus Poseidon level fight. Like
Mm-hmm.
Talia shocks Percy and Percy is like about to drown her when something interrupts them and I remember rereading it and my mouth was just wide open because I was like
Yeah.
I cannot imagine being the person having to break up that fight. As a person who has broken up a fight, I cannot imagine breaking up their fight. Like both of them could kill me.
Yeah. Talia shoves Percy, and he says, "A shock went through my body that blew me backward 10 feet into the water." And then Talia's like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to." Whether or not she meant to is, I feel like, a little bit up for debate, but she does seem a bit surprised at her own strength, at least at first. Percy gets angry, and I think rightfully so. If someone else shoved me 10 feet, I would be a little bit upset too.
I think he is
And
justified.
and he like calls up the water from the creek and throws it at her. And so now she's soaking wet. Remember, it is December in New York, so it's cold. And Chiron's like, guys, like let's not. That's enough." But then Talia, it says Talia held out her spear. "You want some, seaweed brain?" Somehow it was okay when Annabeth called me that. At least I'd gotten used to it, but hearing it from Talia was not cool. "Bring it on, pinecone face," is Percy's comeback. Not one of his best, but I'll still grant it to him.
He's still young. He's still developing his insult range.
Yeah, he's getting there.
He's working on it.
So Percy lifts his sword. Talia like calls lightning down from the sky to her spear, and it hits Percy, and he like hits the ground. He says, "There was a burning smell. I had a feeling it was my clothes." And Chiron's still standing there like, "Talia, that's enough." And of course nobody's listening to Chiron at this point because Percy basically like pulls up all the water from the creek, and there's a huge, he says, "I got to my feet and willed the entire creek to rise. It swirled up hundreds of gallons of water in a massive icy funnel cloud." Yikes, dude.
This I think is one of the first times where we see Percy's powers in action in such a visible way that isn't defensive. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
him being on the offensive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
You'll never guess who actually does break up the fight because it's the Oracle. Remember like the mummy from the attic in the big house?
Yeah.
You were raising your,
I was saying from book 1 is when we really see her.
yes. Yeah, from book 1, she gives Percy the prophecy to go west to the god who has turned, whatever it is. Anyway, she comes out of the big house, comes to the creek where everyone is gathered, And Chiron says, "This is impossible. She has never left the attic. Ever." And that's what breaks up the fight, because the Oracle comes here and gives Zoe a prophecy. And the prophecy goes, "5 shall go west to the goddess in chains. One shall be lost in the wow. One shall be lost in the land without rain. The bane of Olympus shows the trail. Campers and hunters combined prevail. The Titan's curse must one withstand, and one shall perish by a parent's hand."
Dun dun dun.
And then the Oracle just sits down. The Oracle does not do them the favor of going back to the attic, because Grover and Percy are volunteered to do so.
The correct term is voluntold.
Okay, they are voluntold.
You would be surprised how much voluntelling I do in my classroom.
I mean, that's just what classrooms are for, isn't it?
Yeah, you're not wrong.
So Percy and Grover are voluntold to take the Oracle back to the attic. And when they finish, they have a council of Camp Half-Blood.
Each of the cabins sends their lead counselor to go to this meeting.
Yeah, and they all have to decide, what are we going to do with this prophecy? Because it sounds like we've got a quest, but this does not sound like a good idea. Just a few things. There's a lot of like bantering and back and forth in this chapter. But one of the things is talking about like, we can't delay because we need to have Artemis. If Artemis is in trouble, then we need to have her rescued before the winter solstice on December 21st, because as Zoe says, Artemis must be present at the solstice. She is one of the most vocal on the council, arguing for action against Kronos' minions, which means the gods haven't been doing crap for the last 3 years, even though they know that there's danger coming, but that's just what the gods do.
I'm in danger.
Exactly. Zoe says, if Artemis is absent, the gods will decide nothing, which personally just sounds like American politicians, or any politicians. But my favorite line is, so Mr. D is at the meeting because he's got nothing better to do. He says, "Are you suggesting that the gods have trouble acting together, young lady?" Dionysus asked. "Yes, Lord Dionysus." Mr. D nodded. "Just checking. You're right, of course. Carry on." I think I really appreciate Zoe's, like, I don't know what I would say it is. I like her almost spunky attitude of just like she respects the gods, obviously, because she's Artemis's lieutenant, but also like she's like, yeah, I'm gonna hold you accountable. And I think Mr. D also appreciates that about her, that she doesn't like
She doesn't hold her punches, physically
Yeah.
or verbally.
Correct.
Zoe is one of my favorite characters, and you know that.
I know.
But Zoe got a spot on the computer. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's how much I
Yeah.
love her.
I really like Zoe. Even though she can be rough around the edges sometimes, I really like her honesty and how like I don't know. I really, really do like Zoe. I just think it's interesting that Mr. D, of all people, seems to have a lot of like respect for Zoe. And of course, he's probably interacted with her before because she's immortal and she's probably been to camp a bazillion times before, but also just like that was an interesting little dynamic that I noticed for the first time on this read.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything like there that's super important, but it was just like, like we finally found someone that Mr. D like almost might get along with in a strange sense.
At least doesn't hate in an outward way or display hatred towards.
Someone that Mr. D tolerates?
I think that's more fair.
Yeah. Anywho.
I have very complicated Mr. D feelings that we'll probably get into more in book 4 and book 5.
Well, we might get into some in the next couple chapters because he shows up again.
Yes, but those are my bad feelings. Good feelings come out in book 4 and 5.
Fair enough. Percy is the one who says, hey, we probably need to have a mixed group of campers and hunters because that's what the prophecy said. So now it comes down to which hunters and which campers are going. There's going to be 2 campers from Camp Half-Blood, and there's going to be 3 of the hunters. Obviously, one of them will be Zoe because this is her quest. Zoe also picks Bianca to go with her, and I forget the other character's name.
Is it Phoebe?
I think it's Phoebe.
I'm going to say something very similar to what I said in book 2, in that Bianca was literally the worst choice to make. You pick one of the 2 people who have 0 training.
Yeah.
I get that it's needed for plot, but like,
not one of Zoe's best strategic decisions.
yeah.
But there is a reason why she picks Bianca. I don't know if it's
There
a good
is.
reason. We'll talk about that more in the second half of the book, I think.
There is a good reason. I know it's necessary for plot, but
It's just
gah! And again, why are we sending babies on quests?
because the gods are stupid and I don't respect them.
Ugh!
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Rachel, I'm going to be real with you for a second. It would not be middle grade fiction if the characters were not children.
Logically, I know that.
I know it
However-
doesn't mean you have to like it.
However, I can't. They're just babies.
I know. So Selena actually sticks up for Percy. She's like, yeah, he's right. There should be 2 campers that go. Zoe responds, oh, and would you like to volunteer? And Selena's like, heck no, I'm not going anywhere with the hunters. I want to see Selena and Zoe fight. I know Selena will lose because Zoe has significantly more, like, years of experience. However, I think Selena could give her a run for her money.
I can agree with that. I think especially book 5 Selena
Oh, yeah.
could give Zoe a run for her money, but that's also like we've seen more of Selena at that point, so like we know a bit more about her.
I would also contend, this is not really a hill for me to die on, but I am also going to contend, I do think Selena is more skilled in battle than we've seen already. Like,
oh, for sure.
We've never seen her. We only see her in passing in book 2, and really the first time we see her in combat, and it's only barely, is here in this book. But Talia trusted her to lead an important part of their plan and capture the flag, so she must have some kind of skill that Talia would trust her.
I'm just saying that by book 5, we know overtly more about her. So, obviously, book 5 Selena versus Zoe would be impeccable.
And then Percy suddenly realizes he's not going on this quest, and he's like, I need to rescue Annabeth.
Which the quest is not about Annabeth, and Talia and Grover are the 2 campers going on the quest.
Right. Because Zoe's like, I'm not traveling with any boys. Apparently Grover does not count because he's a satyr, but whatever. Okay, Zoe. Okay, so Zoe picks Phoebe because she's the best tracker. Then she picks... Well, actually, the Stolls show up after Zoe picks Phoebe. So do you want to go ahead? So Zoe picks Phoebe and Bianca seems shocked, and understandably so, that she's been chosen. And Percy says he felt kind of sorry for her. I remembered my first quest when I was 12, and I had felt totally unprepared. A little honored, maybe, but a lot resentful and plenty scared. And Percy, again, I know I keep going back to this, but Percy really sees himself in both Bianca and Nico, and he's very protective of both of them. He's only a year or 2 older than Bianca. Her age is a little bit fuzzy, but so is Nico's, but that's a whole different problem. But he is very protective over both of them, and I think he wants to make sure that these campers have not that Percy's had a bad experience, but a like better experience at camp than he did when he first arrived. Anyway, and then Talia goes and Camper is picked. And then Percy's looking around and he's like, wait, my math isn't good, but we're at 5 people and I'm not one of them. And Annabeth isn't gonna be he is mostly worried about Annabeth. And Zoe totally calls him out for it. Percy says, I have to go. I have to be on this quest. And Zoe's like, why? Because of your friend Annabeth? And Percy's like, I mean, yeah, but like, I just feel like I need to go. And it's like, Percy, just admit it. You're allowed to care about your friends, okay?
I am drawing a very poor parallel in my head to the siren scene back in book 2, where Percy was not in Annabeth's perfect world vision. And we talked about
Right.
why in the last episodes, but now we have Percy like wanting to go on this quest to get Annabeth but not being able to admit it, just like how like Annabeth's and like Percy should have been in that image of Anna with Annabeth and with Luke
Right.
and all that, but wasn't. And now Percy's like, I need to go on this quest, but I can't admit that it is for Annabeth.
Mm-hmm. Regardless, Percy is resigned to staying home, and he has a little bit of a heart-to-heart, kind of, with Chiron after the council meeting is over. And Chiron's like, look, I probably wouldn't have picked you for this quest. And Percy's like, gee, thanks. Chiron, not the best at pep talks. Just gonna throw that out there.
Chiron, not the best at peopling.
You know what? If I was an immortal horseman, I don't know if I'd be the best at peopling either.
I mean, fair, but also like you've literally been alive for thousands of years. You'd think you'd have something a little better figured out.
Fair enough. Regardless, we get a little bit of analysis here with Chiron just being like, you and Talia are way too much alike. And Percy's like, thanks, I guess. And Chiron points out what I think is a very key part of Percy's character. The difference is that you are less sure of yourself than Talia. That could be good or bad. And he says, well, one thing I can say, both of you together would be a dangerous thing. Percy's like, yeah, we could handle it. Yeah, like at the creek tonight, Percy? Like, I don't think so. Percy's like, well, guess I'm just going to be using my pen sword to write Christmas cards. But he does finally decide to make a call to his mom. Is this the first or second time he's called her?
I think it's
First,
the
right?
first time.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
This is the second time he's used it, but the first time he called Tyson.
Right. So he gives a call to Sally. And this is page 104. And there in the mist was a scene I did not expect. My mom was sitting at our kitchen table with some guy. They were laughing hysterically. There was a big stack of textbooks. Textbooks. There was a big stack of textbooks between them. The man was, I don't know, 30 something, with longish salt and pepper hair and a brown jacket over a black t shirt. He looked like an actor, like a guy who might play an undercover cop on television. Also, just gonna point out they're drinking wine together, which I think is just a fun little tidbit to throw in there. Anyway, this mystery man is saying like, hey, can I use your bathroom quick? And Sally's like, go ahead. And when Sally looks up, after the guy leaves the room, Percy's like, hi mom. And Sally like jumps out of her skin, knocks the textbooks off the table, and she's like, oh, Percy, you okay?
I love Sally. I love the character that we're meeting.
Yeah.
But haven't like met yet, so I'm not really gonna talk about him.
Well, we're gonna meet him soon enough. And Percy just goes, what are you doing? Sally says, homework. And then she kind of hesitates for a second and goes like, oh, wait, that's just Paul. I mean, Mr. Blowfist. He's in my writing seminar. And Percy, being his father's son, says, Mr. Blowfish? Sally goes, Blowfist. Percy.
I also just want to point out that if Percy is thinking that Paul looks like he could be an actor playing a cop on TV, that means that Paul is really attractive for a normal person.
That's a fair point. I mean,
That's not how I
it's
pictured him earlier.
it is what Sally Jackson deserves.
Oh, 100%. 100%. But I'm having a hangdog memory here.
See episode about the merciful crow.
And just being like, wait, he's attractive? Not that I thought Paul was unattractive, but like, I didn't process that the first 2 times.
Mm-hmm. Yes, apparently Paul, Sally's new friend, shall we say, is very attractive.
I love him.
Anyway, Percy tells his mom about everything that's going on with Annabeth, and Sally gets really emotional, which further proves my theory. She has adopted all of Percy's friends, especially Annabeth. Sally, instead of telling Percy, like, oh, I'm sorry, like, I'm sure everything will be okay, she says, you need to do whatever you think you have to do, which is a really big deal. And she says, Percy, your heart is always in the right place. Listen to it. And goes on, I'm telling you that I'll support you even if what you decide to do is dangerous. Whatever you decide, I love you, and I know you'll do what's best for Annabeth. I love her so much. I cannot emphasize this enough.
Mm-hmm.
Just like 10 out of 10, maybe the best mom. Actually, I'm not even going to put a maybe in front of that. Best mom in fantasy fiction.
Considering most other fantasy fiction involves one or both parents being dead.
Shush. Shoo. My point stands.
I'm just saying.
Even if they weren't, I would still say Sally Jackson, best mom in fantasy. You look like you want to argue with me.
No, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to think of a fantasy fiction where the mom's alive and not absolutely terrible.
I'm waiting.
I don't have one.
Well, then there's my point. My point
I
has been proven.
I know. I'm not disagreeing with you.
I do realize the bar is on the floor. The bar is in Hades itself, in fact.
Correct.
However, I do think my point still stands.
Your point does still stand. I am confirming your point.
Thank you. I appreciate the confirmation.
You're welcome.
Mr. Blowfish, or Blowfish, according to Percy, returns, and Sally's like, oh, we're gonna cancel the call, and, like, ends the Iris message. Percy falls asleep. He has another dream about Luke, and he sees Artemis coming. Long story short, Artemis appears, rescues Annabeth from the trap that Luke has ensnared her in,
Mm-hmm.
and an unknown villain says, okay, we can kill the child now, and Luke, in a somewhat surprising turn of events, says to his boss, I guess, she may be useful. She may yet be useful, sir. Further bait. So he stands up for Annabeth to spare her life. And I genuinely don't know if I know why. It could be because he cares for her.
Mm-hmm.
Does he really I have a hard time believing he thinks she'll still be useful even in her weakened state. She is clearly worse for wear at this point, like Percy notices in his dream.
Right.
Or is he so I have a hard time believing that. Does he actually care for Annabeth, or is he kind of manipulating her still in this way, like pretending to care for her? I don't know. Something feels ugh about this exchange.
I think he still has a lot of really complex emotions about Annabeth. Like, he still very much has this connection to her. I think he is manipulating her. And I also think that he is using her for bait. Like,
Yeah.
if he wants the rest of Camp Half-Blood to, like, not even the rest of Camp Half-Blood, but if he wants to get, like, Percy isolated or Talia isolated, like, he needs them to come to him because he does not have
Right.
access to Camp Half-Blood right now.
Right. That's fair. I didn't think of it in terms of, like, Percy or Talia. Like, not that Annabeth isn't important, obviously, but I was like, who else why would they want to bait more people there? They're already coming for Artemis.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I didn't think about the isolation aspect of it. Percy wakes up from his dream and is oh, your favorite character appears, Rachel. Because Percy is startled awake from his dream by our friend Blackjack.
Blackjack!
Would you
I
like to
love
tell us
Blackjack.
about Blackjack?
So Blackjack is the Pegasus that they saved in the last book. At the very end, he was a Luke's Pegasus, as much as somebody can own a Pegasus.
Mm-hmm.
And Percy and the team free him, and he comes to Camp Half Blood, and it always calls Percy boss, like, "Hey boss, how you doing? Like, how's it going?"
Mm-hmm.
And Blackjack is just full of puns, and he's super ridiculous, and I adore him.
Yes. And because, as we know from the Lightning Thief, Percy can communicate with horses or horse-like creatures because Poseidon. So we just get a lot of great conversations between Percy and Blackjack. I also picture Blackjack sounding very New Yorker. I don't know
Yes.
why. In my head, he sounds very New Yorker.
Like sleazy New Yorker. Or
I can,
like transatlantic accent from like the 40s.
yeah.
It oscillates between the two.
Mm-hmm. In any case, we love Blackjack. He has summoned Percy because the hippocampi in the ocean, whatever. What's around Camp Half Blood?
Is it a sound?
I don't remember.
I don't know.
The water. There's hippocampi in the water, and they found a sea creature in distress. So Percy flies out on Blackjack, dives into the water. I just want to point out this one little paragraph. He says, I'd gotten more comfortable doing stunts like that the past couple of years. I could pretty much move however I wanted to underwater just by willing the ocean currents to change around me and propel me along. Like, Percy growing stronger, we see that in the fight with Talia and here as he's doing the sea rescue. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Percy rescues this strange, what does he say it looks like?
Well, it
He
looks like
says,
a cow.
yeah, it is, he calls it a sea cow, but not, he says, like, but it's not like a manatee, it's like a actual cow with the back end of a serpent. The front half was a calf, a baby with black fur and big, sad brown eyes. And its back half was a black and brown snaky tail with fins running down the top and bottom, like an enormous eel. Percy cannot communicate with this creature because it is a cow and not a horse.
It is not horse enough.
It is not horse enough. Fortunately, Percy is able to free it. It goes back into the ocean. All is well. Actually, I wasn't going to mention this, but I do just want to say this real quick, because this is a recurring theme that I'm picking up on in the Rick Riordan books this time. Percy, so he sees the creature and it's tangled in a fishing net. He says one of those big nets that they use on trawlers to catch everything at once. I hated
Mhm.
those things. It was bad enough they drowned porpoises and dolphins, but they also occasionally caught mythological animals. When the nets got tangled, some lazy fishermen would just cut them loose and let the trapped animals die. And we already know Grover's an environmentalist, right? We know that from book one. I just want to tell you, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover are absolutely like, they're all on the same page about this.
Yes.
They would go to a protest together.
Oh yeah. For sure.
That's all I have to say about that. That's something I wrote there.
Thank you for coming to our TED Talk.
Thank you for coming to our TED Talk.
We agree on everything.
Percy names the creature Bessie because it's a nice cow name. That is, in fact, what he says. It just seemed like a good cow name. He is not wrong.
He is not wrong.
When Percy returns back to camp at dawn, he sees Nico spying on the hunters as they're getting ready to go. And this is when we find out Phoebe is not going on the quest after all.
Nope. Because the Stoll brothers are little poops and I love them.
What have they done, Rachel?
They gave Phoebe a shirt with some sort of like demigod itching powder.
Well, it's centaur blood.
There we go.
Yeah, which
Demi
is
got
poisonous.
itching powder, and
Yeah.
Phoebe can't go.
Right.
She's incapacitated, and first of all, they shouldn't have done that. We know that. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it really funny because I love the Stoll brothers, and that is something that my students would do.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
them.
In fairness to Phoebe, it says, but she'll be bedridden for weeks with horrible hives. There's no way she can go. Poor Phoebe. She does live.
She comes back, right? Like, we see the hunters again in a future series.
I think so. I can't actually remember off the top of my head.
I
I
just
do think
remember
we'd see her
reading
again at
something.
least once.
Yeah. I remember reading something about something at one point, and I think she was there.
Mm-hmm.
All that to say, she comes back.
All that, yeah. And all that to say, Phoebe's not going on this quest. And Percy uses Annabeth's invisibility cap to sneak up to where Nico has been spying on the hunters. And Percy confronts Nico. He's like, what are you doing out here? And Percy says, I'll bet you're thinking about following the hunters. Nico goes, how'd you know that? Percy says, because if it was my sister, I'd probably be thinking the same thing. But you can't. Nico says, because I'm too young? Because they won't let you. They'll catch you and send you back here. And yeah, because you're too young. You remember the Manticore? There will be lots more like that. More dangerous. Some of the heroes will die.
Mm-hmm.
And Nico kind of looks defeated for a second, then he thinks about it and he's like, wait, you can go for me. And Percy's like, this conversation's not going the way I expected to. And basically, Nico's like, you can go, you can keep an eye on them, you can keep an eye on my sister, like, make sure she comes home safely. And he's like, you're gonna go anyway, aren't you? I know you're gonna sneak away. Nico says, look, I won't tell anyone that you left, like, just go and, like, you can save your friend and you can protect my sister. And Percy says, I'll go and I'll help them. And Nico says, you have to promise to keep my sister safe. Percy says, I don't know, that's a big promise to make. Nico insists on a promise, and Percy says, I'll do my best. I promise that. Nico says, okay, good luck. One thing I wrote down here, and then I think, Rachel, you look like you want to say something. I just wrote, Nico really idolizes Percy. It's like one of the heroes in his Mythomagic game come to life, right? And in his
Mm-hmm.
game, the heroes always win. He doesn't think Percy is going to let him down, and the thought never even crosses his mind. He's like, oh, Percy's going to win because he's just like my game.
Yep.
What were you going to say, Rachel?
Nico and Percy's relationship is the foil of Percy and Luke's relationship from book 1.
Oh, stop.
Am I wrong?
No, I don't like it.
And it hurts. Like, it hurts.
I am in physical pain.
And it just makes me so upset. Like, Percy is the redemption of Luke for Nico, right? Like,
Percy is being the person he wanted Luke to be for him.
Yep. 100%.
Ugh. Excuse me while I cry for a minute.
I'm sorry.
It's all your fault. You wrote these books. It's all your fault.
Obviously.
Yes, Rachel is actually Rick Riordan, and she wrote these books specifically to cause me pain.
If I wrote these books, do we really think that I would be sitting on student loans still?
Fair enough. I thought you were going to say, if I wrote these books, do you really think I'd be recording this stupid podcast with you? That's what I thought you were going to say.
I would never. Maggie.
Do you think I would demean myself to collaborate with I can never think of the word for, like, some scruffy nobody like you?
Maggie.
I'm just making a joke.
I'm not letting you talk poorly about yourself.
I'm not talking poorly about myself. I'm just making a comparison.
You called yourself a nobody.
I mean,
if you're a nobody, then I'm a nobody.
We can be nobody together.
Then
you know
we
who
would
else
be
was
somebody.
Do you know who else was a nobody?
Percy.
Odysseus. Thank you for coming to my bad mythology jokes time. Anywho, Percy sneaks away on the quest with Blackjack, and he is confronted. He doesn't get very far because he is confronted in New York City by Mr. D.
Please give me a moment to contain my eye roll.
Yeah, Mr. D shows up and he's like, "What do you think you're doing? Like, I guess I'm supposed to stop you," or something like that. They have this whole conversation about heroes, and Percy's like, "You're just like everyone else, blah, blah, blah." One of the things that Mr. D, I actually like, so this is, honestly, I can't remember if I said this already, but this is where we start to get the idea of like, this book is about heroes and what makes a hero. And Mr. D
Mm-hmm.
specifically says, "My point is, you heroes never change. You accuse us, being the gods, of being vain. You should look at yourself. You take what you want, use whoever you have to, and then you betray everyone around you." He's referring specifically to the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, which
Mm-hmm.
we talked a little bit about and we'll talk more about in the next book because that takes place in the labyrinth. But he mentions how, Ariadne, she's the one who helped Theseus get through the labyrinth and defeat the Minotaur. And you want to know how Theseus thanked her? He just dumped her off on some island somewhere. That is one interpretation of the myth. We don't need to go into it right now. The point here is heroes often suck. And
That's
if you
putting it
read,
nicely.
that is putting it nicely. If you read any like stories anywhere, most of the time the heroes of Greek myths suck. They're not really great people, at least as we would consider them in our modern context.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what Mr. D of all people is acknowledging here, which it's kind of shocking to hear a god say something like this. Because even though the gods maybe don't like heroes, they don't usually say it so bluntly,
Right.
I think. Anyway, Mr. D goes on. He says, "You'll excuse me if I have no love for heroes. They are a selfish, ungrateful lot. Ask Ariadne, or Medea. For that matter, ask Zoe Nightshade." And, of course, that sets up what do we know about, what do we need to learn about Zoe still? Yeah, I don't know. I just really like how this sets up Percy's not like other heroes kind of journey here. Also, I know it's not really the point of the scene, but Mr. D, maybe the feminist?
Oh, definitely.
Like, I would not have expected that, but you know what? I can appreciate that about him.
See, this is where I start getting the complex feelings about Dionysus because I
Mm-hmm.
really want to dislike him.
Yeah.
I really want to hate him, and I just can't. Because yes, he's at Camp Half Blood as a punishment, but he has a justification for all of his feelings towards half bloods and towards
Mm-hmm.
demigods.
Yeah.
And in the future, we'll see him like interacting with his kid, like his actual children.
He has demigod children.
He has demigod twins at camp.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have them referenced in book 1 because we hear about them working in the strawberry fields.
Right.
However, this is like it is known that the gods can't interact with their kids, except Dionysus does get to because he is the director of camp.
Right.
Albeit he's very distant, but he still gets to interact
Mm-hmm.
with them. And apparently I am going to get into my complex Dionysus feelings even though we're not quite at that book yet, and this is probably going to stay in this episode.
That's
But
fine.
I cannot find it in my being to hate Dionysus.
I don't
Like,
think I can either.
I hate Zeus. That is a known fact.
Mm-hmm. And
I
Dionysus... Go ahead.
go ahead.
I was going to say, and Dionysus isn't perfect. I mean, Percy
No.
even calls him out earlier in this scene, because Dionysus is like, yeah, after Theseus dumped Ariadne, I found her and I made her my wife on Olympus. And Percy's like, wait a second, weren't you sent to Camp Half-Blood as a punishment because you were chasing after another woman? And Percy's like, not Percy. Dionysus is like, yeah, but this ain't about that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Dionysus still is not perfect, but
But
he's
none of the
not
gods
the
are.
worst.
Right.
And a lot of the gods are way worse. Again, Bar on the floor. Bar is in Hades.
Right.
But
And when you consider that like Dionysus's dad is Zeus, like the
hmm,
the apple fell pretty far from the tree there.
the apple was on another continent.
I just like I I'll have more coherent Dionysus thoughts in Labyrinth and The Last Olympian, but like
Hmm.
Dionysus, if I had to pick a godly parent who I thought actually parented somewhat well, and I'm using parenting to mean any child rearing of any child, not
Hmm.
just their own child.
It's a very loose definition.
Yes. Dionysus would be one of the gods in my top like tier,
I can get behind that.
which is saying something.
Maybe we'll have to do a ranking in our last episode, a tier list of the best parents.
So we've already talked about doing a tier list of just the gods in general and the
Mm-hmm.
characters and a tier list of how many tortilla slaps
Tia
they're getting.
slaps. We need to keep a list. One of you listening back home, you want to start a Google Doc because I never go back and listen to our old episodes. So
Yeah, it's all me.
yeah.
It's
So
all
Rachel, start a
me.
list.
Okay, rude.
I love you.
I love you too. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Mr. D does let Percy go though, and Percy continues on. He follows the van all the way to Washington D.C. because that's where all the bad things happen in Rick Riordan books.
You're not wrong.
Shout out to the Red Pyramid for existing. Percy does see Luke in person, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So the questers go to the National Air and Space Museum, but Percy takes a little bit of a detour because he sees Dr. Thorne from West, whatever the school was. It doesn't matter. And he finds Dr. Thorne meeting with some of the villains. They're just, hanging out in a embassy. Did I not?
They're hanging out at the Natural History Museum.
National. Yep, that's it. Thank you. I don't know why I thought it was an embassy.
I remember because I am scared of that museum.
Mm-hmm.
As you do.
As you do. And the first thing Percy says where Percy thinks to himself when he sees Luke is, he looks like crap. Not that exactly, but that's basically what he says. His blonde hair looked almost gray. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in just a few months. His scar
Mm-hmm.
looked like it had recently been reopened. Like, Percy's like, man, you're not looking too good, Luke.
He's really going through it.
He's really going through it. He only has himself to blame. I know you're going to argue with me on that, but let's just go with it for right now.
I didn't even say anything.
I'm not trying to call you. I just know that it is a little bit more complex, but that's not the point.
Yeah. Yes. Continue.
um. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff about like our evil plans and yada 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 that I don't really want to get into right now. But there's this we're introduced to this character only known as the General, and the General says to Luke, "You, of course, will have a role to play." Percy says, "I thought Luke turned paler when the General said that." Luke doesn't want to be a pawn of the Titans either, and yet he's still here. Just an interesting note for you to tuck into the back of your I tried to say mind and brain at the same time. I almost said brain or main.
I just
Tuck
want to
that in the
point
back of
out
your main.
in the back of your mane. We're the Nemean lion.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, every single time they say the general, I start singing the General Insurance commercial in my head.
Of
So
course.
just know that is exclusively what is running in my head right now.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
The general first he summons some baby saber-toothed tigers.
They're so cute.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't
And
like them.
he doesn't like them. Instead, they get some skeletons.
Mm-hmm.
and the skeletons are going to track the other the questers. And Percy's like, okay, I should go warn them. So he goes and he breaks a few rocket ships, as the next chapter tells us. There's a big fight at the natural hit or not, sorry, I read the wrong thing. There's a big fight at the Air and Space Museum. All kinds of shenanigans goes down. We fight the Nemean lion, I think,
Mm.
which is one of the monsters that Hercules fought, in as one of, I think it was one of his 12 labors. Regardless, Hercules fought it. That's really all you need to know about it. Big bulletproof lion. Percy discovers that the only way to defeat it is with astronaut ice cream. Yes, Rachel.
So I come from a weird family. We know this, right?
Yes, we've talked about this extensively, I
Yes.
think.
Uh, my dad's cousin, when he was little, exclusively ate space food sticks.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
I don't know. I'm
Okay.
99% sure he's autistic. So,
Ah.
like, that probably contributed to it, but he only ate space food sticks. So, that's, again, in case you're wondering what's running through my head during this scene,
Mm-hmm.
it is my dad's cousin.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Anyway, big fight. Percy throws some of the astronaut food or whatever into the lion's mouth, and the lion is so grossed out that it keeps its mouth open and they're able to kill it through the mouth, which, that's a good time.
It could be
Um
worse.
it could in fact be worse. Um I do want to call Zoe out a little bit in this chapter though, because she gives this taunt to Talia where she says, "You never had any wisdom when it came to boys. You could never leave them behind." I don't think that's very accurate or fair to Talia.
I agree.
I know they're in kind of a tense moment here, but I just don't think that's very fair.
I agree. I think
Anyway,
it I think it
yeah, go ahead.
cheapens I think it cheapens any act that Talia does.
Yeah. It's a cheap shot on Zoe's part, and I understand kind of why Zoe does it, but I'm like, dang, Zoe, like, now's not the time.
Right.
We kill the lion with some freeze dried spaghetti and ice cream. The spoil that we get from it is a glittering fur coat, or it's the lion's pelt basically. Which, when
Mm-hmm.
Percy picks it up, it transforms into like a leather jacket, kind of, or some kind of jacket, a brown
Yeah.
jacket, which is
I
bulletproof.
I think it's like a bomber jacket, and he says it's not really his style.
Yeah, but Percy takes it because it's rightfully his, as Zoe says,
Mm-hmm.
and as they're leaving the as they're leaving the museum, Zoe says, "I do not like it, but there is no changing fate. You are the fifth member of the quest, and we are not leaving anyone behind." Also, I misquoted, so I'm going to read it again. "I do not like it, but there is no changing fate. You are the fifth quest member, and we are not leaving anyone behind." And I just want to say, you could pretty much summarize all of Greek mythology of I don't like. You could pretty much summarize all of Greek mythology with I do not like it, but there is no changing fate.
Yep.
That's just ancient Greece for you. See Apollo again in the next chapter, although he's incognito, as he says. I'm trying to find what his code name is.
I think it's like Frank or something.
Yeah, what does he say? We don't realize I mean, the gang doesn't realize it's Apollo right away. I realized it's Apollo right away.
I totally forgot it was Apollo because this is only the second time I've read the book
Mm-hmm.
until they talked about the heat leaving because they're like warming themselves around a
Yeah.
fire, and like
Mm-hmm.
1 second the guy's there, and then the next second he's not there, and oh he calls himself Fred.
Yes. He says, "I'm incognito. Call me Fred."
Yes, sorry, it just popped into my head, but I remembered when the heat disappeared and the train
Mm,
appeared.
yeah. So they get on this train that is transporting cars. So everyone gets to pick their own car to ride in, which is quite exciting. And we get a bunch of different like conversations. Percy and Luke, or not, yeah, Percy and Luke talk. Yep, that's what I meant to say, of course. Percy and Talia talk a little bit. about different things, and they talk about Annabeth, and it turns out Talia hotwired the car that she's sitting in so that she could listen to the radio while they ride. Um, and just a fun little anecdote. Percy says the radio was playing the White Stripes. I knew the song because it was one of the only CDs I owned that my mom liked. She said it reminded her of Led Zeppelin, which I just think that's a fun little anecdote to learn about both Percy and Sally.
Mm-hmm.
Percy and Talia talk a little bit, and they kind of they end up having an argument about Luke. And we learn that the hunters did try to recruit Talia back when she was traveling with Annabeth and Luke, and Talia declined. And Zoe's like, Luke's gonna let you down one day. And Percy says, man, can't believe she was right. And that's what ticks Talia off, and she kicks him out of her car. So Percy goes and finds his own car. He gets in Grover's Lamborghini.
Yes.
And Grover's asleep. That's when Apollo appears, and they're chatting. And Apollo's like, look, Zeus says gods can't interfere with quests, but nobody messes with my baby sister. Nobody. And I just want to say, I dislike Apollo's arrogance. However, I appreciate him looking out for Artemis. I'm glad that there's at least one moderately good familial relationship among the Olympians. Gotta have somebody, right?
Yeah.
Apollo's not the worst.
Could be so much worse.
Could be so much worse. Could really be so much worse.
However, this is another one of those limbo and hell situations.
Yes.
So, take it as you will.
Basically, anytime we say, could be worse, we're basically saying the bar is really low, but we're going to appreciate what we can get.
Exactly.
Percy has another dream, and he's realizing that the girl in his recurring dreams is actually Zoe. So that's another little thing for us to think about later. But we get to my favorite scene in the whole book in chapter 12. It might not actually be my favorite scene, but I think it's hilarious. I was losing my mind. So they end up in basically the middle of nowhere, in this little place called Cloudcroft, New Mexico. The air was cold and thin, blah, blah, blah. It's freezing there. There's nothing around. It looks to be like a ski town, and there's nothing going on there except skiing. Even Talia says, no bus station, no taxis, no car rental, no way out. And Grover says, there's a coffee shop. So the gang goes and gets coffee. Grover and Zoe go to get coffee, while Percy, Bianca, and Talia go and check out the grocery store to see if they can find some directions. This is on page 162. Inside the store, we found a few valuable things about Cloudcroft. There wasn't enough snow for skiing, the grocery store sold rubber rats for $1 each, and there was no easy way in or out of town unless you had your own car. And then the clerk tells them, you could call for a taxi, but it's going to cost a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. The clerk looked so lonely, I bought a rubber rat. Then we headed back outside and stood on the porch. Wonderful, Talia grumped, sorry. I'm going to walk down the street and see if anybody in the other shops has a suggestion. And Percy's like, but the clerk said, but Talia's already gone because she's restless. And Percy's like, I get that. That's an ADHD thing.
Not wrong.
Yeah. So now Percy and Bianca are just kind of standing there. Percy goes, I was never very comfortable talking one-on-one with girls anyway, and I'd never been alone with Bianca before. I wasn't sure what to say, especially now that she was a hunter and everything. Nice rat, she said at last. I said it on the porch railing. Maybe it would attract more business for the store. I don't know what it is about this exchange, but it's Percy walking into the store being like, wow, they sell rubber rats for $1, feeling so bad for the person in the store that he buys a rubber rat out of pity and then just sets it down, and Bianca's like, nice rat. It kills me. I'm sorry. I don't know why it's so funny. It's so weird. It feels perfectly Percy in the best way. It also feels like something I would do. So maybe that's part of it.
Bianca's response of being like, nice rat is something I would do.
Yeah. So basically, this is just a conversation you and I would have.
It is a conversation we are quite literally having.
Yes. However, the rat does come into play. The rat is an integral part of the scene. As they're standing there trying to figure out what they're gonna do, Grover has like a moment, and something happens in Cloudcroft.
Mm-hmm.
A warm breeze goes by. There's suddenly like it feels like fresh air. It feels like springtime. Grover drops his coffee cup, which was decorated with pictures of birds. Suddenly, the birds peeled off the cup and flew away, a flock of tiny doves. My rubber rat squeaked. It scampered off the railing and into the trees. Real fur, real whiskers. Suddenly, things are coming to life around them. And then Grover collapses because he often does that. And then the skeletons from DC appear. They're tracking them down. The gang has to run. But even though there's no way out of Cloudcroft, they do receive a gift from the wild, as Grover puts it, which is a gigantic boar. It has a fancy name. Let's see if I can remember what it is.
I do not know. I can't say it.
Excuse my crude pronunciation of the Erymanthian boar. Erymanthian? Sure. And Grover keeps insisting it is a gift, a blessing from the wild. The boar almost kills them, and Percy says, "Yeah, I feel blessed."
Hey, blessings come in all manners.
Mm-hmm. Ain't that the truth? This is another, by the way, this is another monster that Percy realizes Hercules had fought once before, and he's like, but I don't remember how he'd beaten it, so, one for, you got halfway there, Percy. I'll give you half credit.
You tried.
Eventually, they're able to rig up a way to sled behind the boar as it pulls them out of Cloudcroft and to safety.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we end the chapter on Zoe saying, "I never thought I would sense that presence again." And Percy asks, "What presence?" She stared at me like I was an idiot. The Lord of the Wild, of course. Just for a moment, in the arrival of the boar, I felt the presence of Pan.
Yep.
And that's the end of chapter 12, and that's where we're ending our podcast for today.
Indeed. I do have one thing I want to say, though.
Sure.
Kind of related to this chapter, because if the last book was the Odyssey, right, and Odysseus's journey, this book is Hercules.
Absolutely.
Or Heracles.
Heracles. Sorry, I always say it. I'm so used to saying Hercules. Technically, I should be saying Heracles. Hercules is the Roman name, even though that's more common. Heracles is
The Greek
his
name.
in Greek. Mm-hmm.
Can I tell my story about how I figured that out and how pissed I was?
Absolutely.
So I'm like, I think I'm like driving to work, right? So I'm driving to work. It's like 6:30 in the morning. You all can't see it. I have hand motions. I'm driving to work 6:30 in the morning. And I'm listening to something and they say Heracles instead of Hercules. And I was like, I wonder why they say Heracles instead of Hercules. So I continue my drive to work because I can't Google while I drive. And I get to work and I Googled it. And I got so angry that I had to leave my classroom and go and talk to a coworker and tell him about it because I was so frustrated. I was like, who did this? Who did this? And at the time we were reading The Catcher in the Rye, and it references Hercules, but they're talking about Greek mythology. So our original theory was like, oh, it was Disney when they produced Hercules. And I was like, no, it's not. Because when you look at The Catcher in the Rye, it says Hercules, but they're talking about Greek mythology, so it should be Heracles. So this has been a problem for at least 70 years.
Somebody missed a memo somewhere.
Seriously. And do you think they knew it was gonna piss me off this much?
Probably. They did it specifically to annoy you.
I was gonna say, I think they did it just to annoy me.
Mm-hmm. Specifically, someone somewhere was like, in 70 years, we're really going to tick off somebody named Rachel.
And she's gonna talk about it on a podcast.
I don't even know what a podcast is.
But she's gonna talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is my I'm pissed off, so I'm gonna go tell somebody about it
That's fair.
reaction.
Yeah. Um, but I will just to kind of wrap up the conversation, because I like the point. There is sort of, I don't know if it's a theory or just an idea, that each of the books in the original Percy Jackson series are, at least in some ways, let me try that again. Each of the books in the Percy Jackson series are in some way based on a particular Greek hero.
Yeah.
So the Lightning Thief, most of the adventure comes from Perseus, like Medusa being a big role in that.
Mm-hmm.
The Sea of Monsters is very clearly based on the Odyssey. Like, there's no question there. Yeah. With the Titan's Curse, it's very much Hercules, or Heracles. Sorry, I'm going to correct myself. In the Titan's Curse, it is very much Heracles.
Right.
And it's very interesting, especially because we had that conversation in the Sea of Monsters between Percy and Hermes, where Percy says to Hermes, I really look up to Heracles
Mm-hmm.
as like his like hero of Greek mythology. And now we are seeing Percy play in roles of Heracles' story, and it becomes more and more important as the story goes on, especially in the second half, which we'll talk about in our next episode. But it's very interesting that the book in which Percy is learning what it means to be a hero, he is walking in the footsteps of the hero that he has looked up to the most.
Yep.
And so that's why it becomes especially important where the story ends up at the end. But again, I'm going to save all that for our next episode. But yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's partly why the Titan's Curse is one of my favorites, though, because it's just everything starts coming together in such a way that feels so satisfying to me as a reader.
Agreed.
But so that's the first 12 chapters of the Titan's Curse. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about the second half and where our characters end up. And we're going to have a lot of emotions about things, especially about chapter 13. But we're going to save that for another time.
I think I get more emotional at the very end of the book based on the reaction to what happens in chapter 13.
Yeah, that checks out.
But anybody who knows me is not at all surprised by that.
Nope. I sure am not.
Yeah.
Anyway, Rachel, do you have anything else to say to the people before we close out?
I don't think so. Be prepared for me to sound more and more tired with each recording because school starts next week.
Woo!
Not woo. Not woo. I love my job. I love my kids. Not excited.
That was a very sarcastic woo. I just want to clear that up.
I know, but I feel the need to, you know.
I know.
I'm glad you know.
Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next episode with The Titan's Curse Part 2.
Indeed. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye! Thanks for listening to this episode of I'm Not the Book Expert, but She Is. You can find us online at bookexpertpod.wordpress.com or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at bookexpertpod. If you enjoy our show, please consider leaving us a review on our website or wherever you find your podcasts. We'll see you again soon.